Challenging and in many cases banning critical race theory has become a top priority for Republican officials over the past year. Critics believe the theory, which holds that racism is systemically ingrained into American governmental entities and is crucial to examining U.S. history, is politically driven by left-leaning activists and doesn't accurately tell American history. Many Republican governors signed legislation or executive orders on critical race theory. During a number of hearings this year, Republican lawmakers grilled witnesses and Biden administration officials on critical race theory. Critical race theory played a large role in the hearing of new Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Since I've been governor, probably the most significant flashpoint that we've seen, of course in Florida, but even all over the country, has been our emphasis on the rights of parents to help direct the education and upbringing of their kids. And part of this was COVID, I think, awoke a lot of different parents to what was going on in the schools. I do think some of the really sharper ideological agendas have been more recent in terms of what they've been trying to do. And so this all came to a head over the last few years. And states like Florida have led by enacting a Parents' Bill of Rights, which we did in 2021. We also this year enacted curriculum transparency legislation. You as a parent have the right to know what is being taught in your kid's school. You have a right to know what is in, say, a middle school library. And when you hear about the left talking about saying, oh, you know, they're trying to, quote, ban books, just understand, adults can do what they want, but do you think it's appropriate for a sixth grader to have access to books with hardcore pornography in their library? Most parents don't. And so now in Florida, they have an opportunity to fight back and stand up for what is in the best interest of their kids. We've also looked at all the curriculum and what's been going on in the schools, and our view is very simple, and we've just drawn a very firm line in the sand. The purpose of our school system is to educate kids, not to indoctrinate kids. We've done things like ban critical race theory in our K through 12 schools. And what you'll hear from the left and the media is, oh, well, they don't want to teach about slavery or civil rights. Just know in Florida, all of that is required to be taught by statute. That is not what CRT is about. Those are historical facts, and you teach all of American history. But what you do not do is you do not distort American history to try to advance your current ideological agenda. When you have things like the 1619 Project that the New York Times, of course, underwrote, and they want to get that into schools, they say that the American Revolution was fought to defend slavery, and that's false. You can look at why they rebelled. You can look, I mean, the dang thing started in Massachusetts. That wasn't exactly, you know, the head of what was going on in terms of the agriculture. So that's why they wrote pamphlets. They debated it. They talked about it. They listed different things. And that's just the fact. So what they're trying to do when they're doing those false historical statements is they want people to say, you know what, this whole country, the founding of it, they want people to think it was illegitimate or somehow fatally flawed. And in reality, it was the American Revolution that was the first thing that ever caused people to question slavery in the first place. It had been an accepted part of human life. All of a sudden now you're saying, you know, our rights don't come from a king or the government. They come from God inherently. Well, how can you justify having this? And so that really is what birthed a lot of the abolition movements. And so we just have to be accurate about that. And you know, the people on the left that believe in things like CRT, they're effectively taking the position on the American founding that Stephen Douglas did when he debated Lincoln. Lincoln took the position that it was a nation conceived in liberty, and that it was the principles of that would eventually, you know, provide freedom across the board. And Frederick Douglass believed that too. Stephen Douglas said, no, the purpose of the founding was to basically preserve slavery. So the modern day CRT advocates would have taken the side of Stephen Douglas when he was debating Lincoln in 1858 in the Senate. So I believe Lincoln was right, I believe Frederick Douglass was right, and I think most people throughout American history have taken that view. It's also something that is used because they'll say, oh, there's no course labeled CRT? Where are you getting? Of course there's not. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about using those principles to be able to teach a whole host of subjects. And part of what they want to do with that is they want to categorize people's worth based on their race. So if you have some kid, if you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're black, you're oppressed. And they want to have collective guilt imposed on people based on their race. And they want to scapegoat people based on their race. And in Florida, we say that is wrong. We're going to treat people as individuals. We're not going to treat people as parts of different groups. And we're going to make sure people are judged based on their character and achievement and not based on the color of their skin. We're not going to be spending your tax dollars teaching kids to hate our country or to hate each other on the basis of race.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purposes Mr. Gates seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, if you didn't like critical race theory in your corporate training, if you didn't like critical race theory in your kids' schools, this is critical race theory with a gun and a badge and the power to arrest. And if my colleagues on the left are so worried about domestic terrorism, maybe they ought to be establishing new authorities at the FBI and DOJ to look into the BLM riots of 2020. Maybe they ought to have new authorities to go after Antifa and leftist agitators. But no. It's about white supremacy today. My concern is increasingly about the terrorists who are in our country who are crossing the border illegally. I was just in Yuma, Arizona with my colleague, Mr. Biggs, and we were briefed by Customs and Border Patrol about the known terrorists who are crossing our border each and every week, each and every month. And the majority here is more concerned about chasing the ghosts of white supremacy than dealing with those real and actual threats. The Attorney General in the United States came to this committee, misled us about the authorities that were being used to target American parents, and instead of giving the Attorney General an invitation to come back and explain himself, clarify, give us comfort that that's not occurring, we're giving the Department of Justice more authorities to continue the corrupt work that we see that they've already been engaged in. This bill grows government. It gives more authorities to a corrupt, weaponized, politicized Department of Justice and FBI, and it gaslights the targeting of white people. This is particularly problematic in our military. I would note that this legislation has a grave and negative impact on every single American wearing the uniform right now in our military. It has them all concerned that if they liked the wrong meme, shared the wrong joke 7 years ago, that their career could be ruined, that their patriotism could be tarnished. I get these concerns from my district most frequently from the units that are minority units. Because in our military, we try to train everyone to believe that you go through the same systems. You develop the same sense of common purpose. And now when we sick the FBI on the DOD and on our military to try to smear them as domestic terrorists or white supremacists, it erodes unit cohesion. It negatively impacts readiness. I have noticed that the parliamentarian referred this legislation not only to our committee, but to the Armed Services Committee as well. And I would implore the leadership of the Armed Services Committee, do not grant this bill a waiver. It has a significant impact on the readiness of our fighting force. And if this bill is not favorably referred out of the Armed Services Committee, it should not go to the floor. It must be given hearings there to see its full and damaging effect. Increasingly, the left wants to use federal law enforcement to target Americans. We saw that in the Russia hoax. We see that in the ongoing FISA abuses that the committee will not bring forward. We saw it with the targeting of parents who attended school board meetings. And now they're drawing a bead on our military. I thought about amending this bill to include requirements that BLM and Antifa and leftist agitators also be analyzed. But honestly, I'm not going to offer that amendment because I sincerely believe that the gravest threat to our country is the inward turning of exquisite national security authorities, that we intended for terrorists in faraway lands against our own people. And my friends, now you are in power, and so you are trying to weaponize these institutions against those who you consider to be antithetical to your worldview. But keep in mind, that may sound good today when the FBI and DOJ are left-leaning, but they used to be right-leaning. The FBI used to essentially be a white supremacist institution. They targeted Martin Luther King Jr. They targeted Marcus Garvey. They targeted Malcolm X with some of these very authorities. And so I would just caution you against giving the power to an entity to ruin lives and to weaponize the apparatus of government with concepts that we never intended to be used on our soil. And if we do that, I think we'll have a more just system for everyone. We categorically reject white supremacy. It has no role in our country and our lives. But it's almost like we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when we go accuse every American of being a white supremacist, I think then we lose the ability to accurately target the acts of violence that you've correctly identified and that our existing laws could deal with. I yield back.
Well done.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, real quick, for the record, I'd like to introduce an article by CNN from April 22nd, 2022, titled "Florida Releases 4 Examples from Math Textbooks It Rejected for Public Schools." I'd like to enter that into the record, and I'd also like to enter into the record a screenshot of one of the bar graphs from the math book that was rejected by the State Board of Education in Florida.
So ordered.
Thank you. Witnesses, what you're getting is handouts of the items that I just placed into the record. First thing, witnesses, I would like to draw your attention to is the large bar graph that is being placed in front of you. This bar graph is actually from one of the math textbooks that was going to be for Florida adoption. The bar graph that is slated basically states here that it shows the differences among age groups on the implicit association test that measures levels of racial prejudice. Higher scores indicate stronger biases. This is a measuring of racial prejudice by age. This is an example of a math. No, this is math now. This is an example of a bar graph being used in a math textbook that was slated for adoption in the state of Florida. The State Board of Education, under the law that was passed by the legislature dealing with critical race theory in curriculum and in classroom materials, that actually rejected those materials being in classrooms. This is one of the examples that the State Board of Education actually cited for why this math book was rejected. There's another one in the article set that you see. The image at the beginning of the CNN article is, "What me? ? Racist? ? More than 2 million people have tested their racial prejudice using the online version of the implicit association test. Most groups average scores, all between slight and moderate bias, but the difference among groups by age and by political identifications are intriguing." This was in a math textbook that was actually solicited to the state of Florida to be adopted by Florida public schools. So if we're going to talk about curriculum and what should be adopted, should we not actually get to the facts and talk specifically about what is in textbooks? So my question for all the panelists, and everybody can go one at a time, should material like this be in a mathematics textbook that will go before students between the age who might be taking math lessons somewhere in middle school, 5th grade, or even 9th grade? Should this bar graph talking about implicit bias or racial bias be included in a mathematics textbook, not just in the state of Florida, but in any state in the union? Panelists, what is your answer? Not all at once, y'all. Come on. Who's going first?
I don't mind going first. Thank you for the question.
Sure.
And I look forward to hearing the responses from the rest of the panel. You've given us a little bar graph here. This is out of a textbook.
This is out of the textbook. Okay. This is an example of what Florida released about why they didn't adopt a math textbook.
Yeah. So, do we agree that racial prejudice exists?
Dr. Whitfield, the question is, should this be in a mathematics textbook?
Is there math in this textbook? Is disseminating a bar graph part of a student learning math?
Dr.
So
Whitfield, should
it
we be
just so
talking about
happens,
should we be talking
sir,
about
it
implicit
just so
bias in
happens,
mathematics,
sir.
or should we be talking about actual math
Right.
skills?
It just so I would dare say they are learning math skills. It just so happens that, again, this may be something that certain people view as uncomfortable, but racial prejudice is a real thing. And I dare say our students get that, they understand that. So to say that just because something says something about bias or racial prejudice, as the professor has said, like, we can't just remove that because we're trying to talk about something that can make some people feel uncomfortable. And I dare say if people feel uncomfortable, oftentimes there's a reason for that, and maybe that's what's needed to move forward.
Dr. Whitfield, I got to go to some other people because I got 28 seconds
Yeah,
left.
for sure.
That's how congressional hearings work. I would love to have this extended conversation with
Absolutely.
you. Ms. Nossel?
I saw this graph, and I found it surprising and frankly inappropriate for a math textbook. I thought there was a risk that this was going to stoke division, detract from the lesson. Whether the entire panoply of math books, should have been rejected for this one chart, I think is a different question. Could this chart have been modified or changed? I think that is what we should focus on, where the processes followed, where educators consulted. But I understand what you're saying. I think we're all concerned about a polarized environment. We're concerned about how to keep our kids focused on learning and achievement, and something that risks detracting from that, I don't think belongs there.
Well, I mean, look, I know I'm out of time, Madam Chair. I appreciate the indulgence because we're over. The last thing I'll say is, I, for one, I have young sons. My 14-year-old sitting behind me now. I got a 10-year-old son. I don't want children being focused, having their attention distracted from actual learning. If we're going to talk about history, let's talk about history. But if we're going to bring in subjective material into the classroom, that is the problem that has some parents upset in the United States. And that's the concern that we need to think about. That is not a free speech issue, because students are a captive audience. They don't get to leave. Adults, we can walk out anytime we want to. The kids cannot. That's why this is such an important discussion to be had. Madam Chair, thank you so much for the indulgence. I yield back.
They're still around, it's hard to believe. And we will pass a bill making it illegal for any employer to interfere in personal health decisions or to fire employees for not having the vaccine. In addition, a Republican majority must investigate the collusion between Democrat Party politicians and the teachers' unions to keep our children out of school for no scientific reason whatsoever. The irreversible harm that Democrat politicians did to our young people is unforgivable, and American voters will punish them at the ballot box this November. Despite all you're hearing and seeing of China and Russia and Iran and others, our biggest danger is not from outside coming in. Our biggest single danger is from the sick and radical politicians that are knowingly or unknowingly wanting to destroy our country. Our biggest danger is from within, I believe that. As president, I was proud to sign the world's first ban on critical race theory. The Biden administration rescinded that order, but when we retake Congress, Republicans will ban the critical race theory in our schools, ban it in our military, ban it in every part of federal, state, and local governments, just like I did. It was fully banned before. In addition, a Republican Congress must stand up for parental rights and parental choice. I think that's a good idea. No teacher should ever be allowed to teach far-left gender theories to our children without parental consent. It's truly child abuse, plain and simple. By replacing reading and math with pronouns and gender studies, our government-run education system has forfeited the trust of American parents, and they really have. Every mom and dad in America must be given the right to opt out of the indoctrination and send their child to the public, private, charter, or religious school of their choice. Have to do it. Last week, the Biden administration sent Congress a budget crammed with billions and billions of dollars of transgenderism and so-called equity provisions that are nothing more than government-sponsored racism. The Republican Congress will end the woke war on women and children. We will stop illegal government discrimination. We will restore the sacred American principle of equality under the law.
So let me ask you, related to the 1619 Project, which I believe is deeply inaccurate and misleading. 1619 Project is closely intertwined with a movement that is called critical race theory. Critical race theory, as you know, originated at your and my alma mater at the Harvard Law School. In your understanding, what does critical race theory mean? What is it?
Senator, my understanding is that critical race theory is it is an academic theory that is about the ways in which race interacts with various institutions. It doesn't come up in my work as a judge. It's never something that I've studied or relied on, and it wouldn't be something that I would rely on if I was on the Supreme Court.
So critical race theory, as you know, has its origins in the critical legal studies movement, which also came from Harvard Law School, from a number of critical legal studies professors, crits as they were known when we were in law school, who are explicitly Marxists. And they find their origins in Marxism, although critical legal studies frames society as a fundamental battle between socioeconomic classes. Critical race theory frames all of society as a fundamental and intractable battle between the races. It views every conflict as a racial conflict. Do you think that's an accurate way of viewing society in the world we live in?
Senator, I don't think so, but I've never studied critical race theory, and I've never used it. It doesn't come up in the work that I do as a judge.
So with respect, I find that a curious statement because you gave a speech in April of 2015 at the University of Chicago in which you described the job you do as a judge. And you said sentencing is just plain interesting because it melds together myriad types of law, criminal law, and of course constitutional law, critical race theory. So you described in a speech to a law school what you were doing as critical race theory. And so I guess I would ask, what did you mean by that when you gave that speech?
With respect, Senator, the quote that you are mentioning there was about sentencing policy. It was not about sentencing. I was talking about the policy determinations of bodies like the Sentencing Commission when they look at a laundry list of various academic subjects as they consider what the policy should be.
Okay, but you were vice chair of the Sentencing Commission, so let me ask again, what did you mean by, because that was an official responsibility of yours, what did you mean by what you were doing was critical race?
What I meant was that there are a number of, that slide does not show the entire laundry list of different academic disciplines that I said relate to sentencing policy, but none of that relates to what I do as a judge.
So let me ask you a different question. Is critical race theory taught in schools? Is it taught kindergarten through 12th?
Senator, I don't know. I don't think so. I believe it's an academic theory that's at the law school level.
Okay. As you may recall, during the confirmation hearings of Justice Amy Coney Barrett, there was a great deal of attention paid to the fact that Justice Barrett served as a board member on the Board of Trustees of a religious private school, and the press focused very intensely on the views of that school. In your questionnaire to this committee, you disclosed that you are similarly on a board, specifically the Board of Trustees for the Georgetown Day School. and that you've been a board member since 2019, and you're currently still a board member. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In regard to the Georgetown Day School, you've publicly said, quote, "Since becoming a member of the GDS community 7 years ago, Patrick and I have witnessed the transformative power of a rigorous progressive education that is dedicated to fostering critical thinking, interdependence, and social justice." When you refer to social justice and the school's mission on social justice, what did you mean by that?
Thank you, Senator, for allowing me to address this issue. Georgetown Day School has a special history that I think is important to understand when you consider my service on that board. The school was founded in 1945 in Washington, D.C., at a time in which, by law, there was racial segregation in this community. Black students were not allowed in the public schools to go to school with white students. Georgetown Day School is a private school that was created when 3 white families, Jewish families, got together with 3 black families and said that despite the fact that the law requires us to separate, despite the fact that the law is set up to make sure that black children are not treated the same as everyone else, we are going to form a private school so that our children can go to school together. The idea of equality, justice, is at the core of the Georgetown Day School mission, and it's a private school such that every parent who joins the community does so willingly with an understanding that they are joining a community that is designed to make sure that every child is valued, every child is treated as having inherent worth, and none are discriminated against because of race.
The gentleman yields back. It's my pleasure to yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor Waddia, are you a proponent of critical race theory?
I teach with the statute as my centerpiece. So I start with the immigration statute. I do think it's important to also talk about the history of how the statute has evolved. So my students are able to connect the dots between the history of the immigration statute, which has been compared second in complication to the U.S. tax code.
Well, let me ask it this way. Let me ask it this way, Professor. I'm sorry. Do you support critical race theory being taught in our K through 12 schools or in higher education?
It's a term that has had many meanings. I do support teaching history, and I do.
Well, we all support that.
So that's how I would answer the question, Congressman.
Well, you believe discrimination based on race is wrong, right?
I do.
Okay, so one of the key proponents of critical race theory, Ibram X. Kendi, said this, quote, "The defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it's okay." Do you agree with that statement?
I believe that if we have, and I will speak as an immigration expert, if we have immigration policies that explicitly target people based on their country of birth or their religion, I think that's a problematic policy.
No, but that's not what I asked you. I asked this. I asked, if equity is achieved through discrimination, is that discrimination okay? Because the key proponent of critical race theory says it is. I just want to know if you think it is. If equity is achieved through discrimination, is that discrimination okay?
I can frame the question of equity only in a different way, because I answer these questions through the lens of immigration. And so if you want me to answer about where I stand on immigration, I would say that if we have immigration policies.
Well, let me do this then. Mr. Westhill, do you think Asian Americans who've been denied entrance into certain institutions, do you think they are okay with equity being achieved, so-called equity being achieved at some of these schools of higher learning through discrimination. Do you think they're okay with that?
Thank you, Congressman Jordan. No, I don't.
No, because it's real to them, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I will add that I don't know when racial or ethnic discrimination in any form became controversial, but my testimony here, I think, should clearly not be controversial, but it is.
I know. For the life of me, I don't know why it is either. Let me just quickly go to Ms. Nomani. Thank you for being here. So I noticed your shirt. It says, "I'm a mom, not a domestic terrorist." This is an issue that this committee has at least the Republicans have. Once we learned about the memorandum from the Attorney General, memorandum targeting, you got it right there. Well, you got the letter right there from the School Board Association. But I'm just curious, do you think, as someone who's been active in defending the rights of parents, moms and dads in our schools, are you nervous about this now because of a whistleblower who came forward and gave us the email sent from the FBI to agents around the country talking about this threat tag label being placed on parents? Are you nervous that that designation, that label, that tag may be now associated with your name?
I know that we are now under surveillance as parents. We are seeing it in local authorities, state authorities, and federal authorities. And if everybody here is in agreement that they do not want surveillance and undue persecution of any human being, that should include parents. And I applaud you all for just being there for the mama bears and papa bears. Because you know what? We are in the trenches and we are fighting. And it was a mom in Fairfax County, Virginia, who revealed to us that Attorney General Merrick Garland's son-in-law is benefiting from the big tech company contracts with school boards. And so what I want to encourage every parent to do is just be a Nancy Drew, Hardy Boy, whichever way it is, in your school district. File those Freedom of Information Act requests, and that's how we got the emails that traced exactly this school board letter to the White House.
Madam Chair, I would just reiterate the numerous times that Republicans have asked to have the Attorney General back. Remember, his testimony that day said in no way were they treating parents as domestic terrorists, when in fact the day before he made that statement, that email went out to FBI agents around the country that said, put this designation on moms and dads. So once again, we need the Attorney General back here to answer some critical questions, and frankly, what we really need is for him to rescind the memorandum and stop this process he has put in place that is targeting moms and dads. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this very much and the opportunity to have you all before us. This has been really quite a week here in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Ms. McCullen, I would like to come to you first. I am so happy that you are with us today, and I appreciated your comments. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I like how you talked about walking with women as they transition from their pregnancies to that motherhood, and realizing the need to continue to support women after they have those babies, and to support them as they go through this entire process. Likewise, I know that you do some good work to support post-abortive women.
Yes, I do.
Who just they grieve. And acquaintances that I know that have been through that process, there is a grief that is just many times hard to bear.
It's true.
So appreciate your work, and I know you have a card that you give to women.
I do.
Talk to me just a little bit about that, very quickly.
Sure. Well, I have an extra one here, too. And when I'm walking and a young mother comes up to me, as I said earlier, I say, "Good morning, I'm Eleanor, how can I help you?" And I give them the card at the same time. The card has Hope, Help, and Love, and my telephone number. I'm not afraid to give that out. It has my website. And then on the back, a person's a person, no matter how small.
I love that.
So I just give that out. It just shows that I'm not I'm trying not to be a stranger. In just a few moments, Senator, I'm building up trust. And at least they have a name and a number, and I'm not just out there for no reason. I have a purpose.
appreciate that. Let me ask you this. How did it make you feel in Judge Jackson's brief when she referred to pro-life women as hostile, noisy crowd of in-your-face protesters?
Well, as I said, it made me very sad, extremely sad. And that's not the case at all. In fact, if someone is doing those things, harassing or yelling, the sidewalk is not a place for anger. It's not a place for judgment. Anyone that comes to be a sidewalk counselor should be compassionate, not judgmental, and helpful and kind. So we have workshops. I run the workshops. If a new person wants to
let me move on just a minute, but thank you for that work. Ms. Mascott, may I come to you, please?
Yes.
I closed out last night with Judge Jackson, reading back to her some of her opening statement. Now, everyone up here, as I've listened to you all, the ABA, their witnesses that were with us earlier, you talk about preserving our form of government. You talk about preserving equal access, equal justice. And there was a comment in Judge Jackson's opening that I read back to her because she left out something very important. I'm going to read this to you, and I'd like your comment. I've been a judge for nearly a decade now, and I take that responsibility and my duty to be independent very seriously. I decide cases from a neutral posture. I evaluate the facts and I interpret and apply the law to the facts of the case before me without fear or favor, consistent with my judicial oath. And I told her there was a word missing from that I thought deserved more attention. And that was, it should have been there that it should be consistent with the Constitution, because that should be where a justice goes first. Is that not correct?
That is correct, Senator, and I think largely because the Constitution, of course, gives the federal government only limited enumerated powers. And so to be able to have a context for interpreting relevant statutory text, one first needs to think about whether Congress, the federal government, is authorized to take the action in the first place and where the text then falls within the constitutional structure and the judge's role in interpreting it.
And, you know, we had a very difficult time, never got her to nail down her judicial authority, her judicial philosophy. That concerned us. There's another thing I want to ask you about. This is where she talked about CRT in sentencing. This was from a 2015 speech. And I felt like this was really inappropriate. I also try to convince my students that sentencing is just plain interesting on an intellectual level, in part because it melds together myriad types of law. Criminal law, of course, but also administrative law, constitutional law, critical race theory. Is critical race theory a type of law, Ms. Mascott?
Well, Senator Blackburn, I teach a number of courses at Scalia Law School, and none involve critical race theory, so I would not be the best expert on that. As far as sentencing, though, I think, again, in that area as in all, it's important to focus on the text of law, and of course, Congress at the federal level would have the largest role in terms of establishing the range of appropriate sentences for a crime, and so folks applying that, of course, always would be looking to the text of the laws put into place by Congress. Congress has, over the years, given a lot of discretion, but could narrow it if it decided that judges were not applying the rule properly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. Obviously, difficult day for America and our great country. And, obviously, we've got some local issues that you may or may not be aware of, but I wanted to make you aware of them. In our largest city, which is also, they've so demonized and defunded the police in Atlanta, Georgia, that it's unsafe. In fact, they're trying to separate parts of the city so that other folks get protection. It's just a mess. But Uh, I'd like to make you aware of politically motivated lesson plans taught in one of Georgia's largest public school districts. The Atlanta Public Schools is opposing Georgia's new election law and voter identification. Because I'm concerned that our students in Atlanta Public Schools are receiving one-sided information on this bill to advance a candidate for office and their political aims. I want you to know that I wrote a letter to the Georgia Department of Education about this concern. In fact, this week, Georgia had their primary election under Georgia's new election law, and early voting increased 212% above compared to 2020. So I think we need to move away from injecting bias and political indoctrination in the classroom and teach comprehensive facts on issues. Are you aware of this, Mr. Secretary?
So specific to the issue in Georgia, I can't comment. Curricular decisions are made at the local level. And what I can tell you, however, is the way our system is set up is states and local municipalities are the ones who pass curriculum. And it would be important for communication to those bodies take place. What I will tell you is that curriculum should be the truth, And it should cover, what makes this country so great, but include the parts that we're not so proud of as well.
Yeah.
But again,
Mr. Chairman,
we don't work with curriculum here at the department. That would be my opinion based on myself as an educator.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's a big debate on what is the truth, and I would like to, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this letter for the record, please.
Without objection.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, in your testimony, you stated that you're committed to reversing funding inequities. There's nothing more inequitable than a wealthy parent being able to send their child to any school they want. But outdated education policy is telling low-income parents they can't have the same opportunities. We don't want to lose one child in this country. The idea of school choice is not public versus private schools, but the opportunity for parents to choose the best school for their child, regardless of their zip code, whether that be a traditional public, private, charter, or faith-based school. Last year, I asked you if you would support the idea of school choice, and you could not give me a direct answer. So I ask you, Mr. Secretary, will you embrace the idea of school choice to allow every student to flourish in the learning environment they are best suited for?
Yes, I do support.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Secretary, another issue I would like to discuss is the lack of transparency being taught in the classroom, specifically lessons stemming critical race theory. I'm proud that the Georgia State Board of Education adopted a resolution affirming they will work to prevent promotion of divisive ideologies. Parents want an education system that will allow their students to gain skills needed to obtain good paying jobs and that will allow them to be successful. I hope you will be committed to addressing these issues and to supporting school choice in the department's budget.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back.
And so we believe in having that true, solid education. I will point out, because you actually will hear people lie about what we're actually doing in the bill, and they'll say they don't want you to learn about history and all the key things. Just understand, in the state of Florida, it is required in Florida statutes to teach about all segments of American history. You have to teach about the Holocaust. You must teach about African American history. You teach about the institution and the abolition of slavery. You teach about the failure of the post-Civil War amendments to take hold and how you needed to fight for civil rights. We teach all of that because it's real history and it's important. But what we will not do is let people distort history to try to serve their current ideological goals. And we see this in examples like the New York Times' 1619 Project, where they teach that the American Revolution was fought to defend slavery. When in reality, you can read the pamphlets, you can look at the Boston Tea Party, you can see what they were upset about because they told us. They wrote it down, and they wrote a Declaration of Independence to fuel their fight for freedom. And so we have to be accurate, and we cannot allow ideologues to try to distort what has happened in this country's history. And so we will absolutely teach all aspects of history that are true. We will study, in particular, the contributions of both women and Hispanics to Florida and to the United States.